So this afternoon is opportunity to reflect on the Dhamma, the way it is, the reality of here and now. And it's a full moon day. The bhikkhus listen to the recital of the 227 precepts of this particular tradition. This tradition, just to emphasize what tradition really is, something that has carried on from one generation to the next. And so this is a tradition 2,565 years old, as we assume or presume it's that many years ago. And the tradition that we call Theravada Buddhism is like this. And then we talk about the Thai forest tradition, which was established, which we trace back to Luang Por Sumedho in Thailand, northeast Thailand, 100 years ago. And so the Luang Por Sumedho carried on the Theravada tradition in Thailand, and the monks here are bringing this tradition to California. So Abhayagiri is considered a traditional Theravada and Buddhist monastery. And I'm mentioning this, reflecting upon it, because in countries, modern countries like the United States, we have traditions, but they're not very ancient. So the idea of a form to establish the transmission of a tradition to the future, to future generations, is a kind of, the idea of tradition oftentimes is criticized and not understood very well, because we're always looking for change, for modernization, for making things better. So the idea that one generation is going to make everything better than the previous generation. So this is my own particular reflection on this, because I reflect on my life when I was about 20 years old. I was going to make, I was full of ideas, idealism, and looked forward to making things better. And then by the time I was 30, I was terribly disappointed. 10 years passed, and I didn't see that I was in any way better, except the ideal that I was going to change the world was completely discarded. And this particular tradition, what we call alms mendicancy, is it's a fairly new idea in a country like this, where alms mendicants has never been a part of American culture, has never been part of the American cultural tradition, and so it is a rather new example of something new that's taking place in California at this time. So it's because it's new, it can also seem strange, or according to cultural values, it's the idea of being personally independent, self-sufficient, that is very much a kind of ideal for Americans to be able to, I can look after myself, I have my rights, my views should be respected, what I think, who I am, the way I am should be respected. All human beings are equal, and democracy is going to benefit everybody. So these are ideals, and they can be quite beautiful, but ideals are made up in the mind of human individuals. So then the Buddha's emphasis on the way it is, mindfulness here and now, is not about making things better or ideal, but beginning to observe just life as it flows, the way it actually is in reality, whether it's 2,500 years in India or modern United States. And so alms mendicancy is very much based on the realization that humanity is basically good and generous. So in the traditional sequence of dana, sila, bhavana, or generosity, morality, and meditation, then alms mendicancy is an opportunity. It's seen in a country like Thailand, it's an opportunity to be generous. So the Sangha makes that opportunity available. And the word bhikkhu is a Pali word which is oftentimes translated as beggar. So when I first moved to England, living in London, it was considered, did we dare go on alms round in London, because vagrancy and begging is breaking the law. And so we restrained ourselves from going on alms round, and until we found out that through a lawyer, that the law against vagrancy and begging was made before there were ever any Buddhist monks living in England. So I said, it doesn't apply to you. And so we could go begging in London, feeling quite safe. We were not going to be arrested or breaking laws. Alms mendicancy also is being content with little. And so because of the rules, not handling money, not growing things, we can't dig in the soil. We've got all these rules, precepts that prevent us from becoming self-sufficient in practical ways. Then the idea of making oneself available for alms, and to be content with what one gets. And so the ideal, of course, the ideal of a good bhikkhu is content with what he has. So the food in the alms bowl, the shelter for the night, the robes that he's acquired, and medicine for illness, to be content and grateful for that is an ideal. That's ideal, what an ideal bhikkhu should be like. So then, because we oftentimes are idealists, we come from the very high place of how things should be and how oneself should be. If one ordains as a bhikkhu, then one should be content with the shelter for the night, the robes, the food, the medicine that's available. And so as a young bhikkhu, I tried to be content, but I began to realize you just can't will yourself to be content. Because that's not what was really happening, the way it is. And so the idea of be content, one, because I wasn't content much of the time, I felt, I wasn't a very good bhikkhu. I should feel grateful. I should, make myself content in some way. But awareness, mindfulness, is aware of the way it is. So this idea of being content wasn't a kind of precept that you had to conform to, but a suggestion for looking at discontentment. So I began to realize that just willfully trying to say I'm content, I could do that and try to be content. But what was actually happening in my mind didn't feel like contentment. It was just kind of resignation, obeying the rules, fitting in. And so it wasn't, it wasn't happy a state to be in, it wasn't content, but, it was the best I could do as a person, trying to fit into a new way of life. So then I got the idea of looking at discontentment. And so this is where, when we talk about reflection, this is an English word for being a witness to the way it is, not the judge, not the critic, not the critical being that's saying you should be content, you shouldn't, you're a bad monk because you're not content and you should be. That's the inner tyrant, this tyrannical force that we create in our minds, because we're not ideals. We can't just make ourselves into ideal monks according to some ideal we might assume. But reflecting on discontentment is like this. But it's saying not criticizing it, so it's not analyzing why I'm discontent or what's wrong with me, but what, being aware of discontentment is like this. And so you're taking the place of the witness, the Puto, the witness, through the way it is. So this is bhavana, or meditation, in this Theravada sense of what bhavana means. Being aware of Dhamma, of the way it is. So discontentment is a Dhamma, it's not the Dhamma. If it arises and ceases, we call it a Dhamma. It's impermanent. You can't sustain discontentment. It's not a permanent abiding place, and it's certainly not happiness. But it is impermanent, and it arises and ceases. It has a beginning and ending. And you keep reflecting that it is what it is, but it's not a real person. When there's discontentment in my mind, is it mine? Do I claim it, as some kind of personal identity or flaw in my character? I can do that if I'm not reflecting on the way it is. I'm merely creating a sense of personal attachment to an emotion or a state of mind that I'm experiencing in the present moment. So instead of doing that, reflecting on it is not trying to change it, but to totally accept it, receive it like a Dhamma teacher. It's a Dhamma teaching you about the way it is and the changingness of conditions as you can actually witness them. So when we talk about the personality or ego, it's a creative thing. If you really reflect on what you know, your own personal ego, your tendencies to believe in things, your emotional habits, you know, then you create a feeling of separateness, an identity with oftentimes very unstable, changing conditions. So we can become idealists, get very attached to how things should be. But then that leads to suffering and unhappiness, because life in this form, the changing conditions of what we call samsara, is not an ideal. You know, it's not ideal. It's not the way we would like it to be, but it is the way it is. And so the Buddha pointed that out in all his sutta teachings, as they're recorded in the canon. You know, it's an effort to try to encourage all of us, human individual bodies, to reflect, to be the observer. It's not to analyze or make value judgments about the state of mind you're in, because that's a different mental state. When we feel angry or discontented or offended or upset or frightened or jealous, you know, then the inner critic, the monster within, will start, you know, according to the ideals you may cherish, which are quite beautiful, you can feel you're not good enough, and so we have tremendous problems in the Western world, both in the States and in European countries. Judo-Christianity is very much religion based on the idea that you're born in sin. So we don't have this sense that, you know, we consider there's something wrong with us from birth, that, you know, you're born as damaged goods already, where in Asian countries like India or China and Japan, where like Hinduism and Taoism, Buddhism and all that, don't have that kind of conditioning. I remember when somebody asked the Dalai Lama once about guilt, and he said basically Tibetans like themselves, see themselves as basically good. Same with Thais. And being a teaching meditation in the West, you're aware of how guilt-ridden Western culture makes us, because of this tendency to be so attached to how democracy should be, what a real democracy should be as an ideal. And, you know, living this long, you know, observing the American politics, you know, I don't remember any time where Americans were contented with any political as president or government, whether it's a Democrat or Republican. So it doesn't, you know, idealism doesn't lead to contentment. It just leads to cynicism or fault-finding or disappointment and blaming the inadequacies of democratic elections or or that on others. So it's, there's also the way we personally blame others for our suffering. So the individual personality is changing, so examining it over these many years, living as a Buddhist monk, you get a good relationship with your personality. You begin to see it as not me or mine. It's not what I am. It's a condition that arises and ceases according to other conditions. And so this is reflecting on personality, not trying to change it or trying to improve it, trying to become a nicer, better person, or trying to get rid of my defects, my flaws, things I don't like about myself. It's not about trying to get rid of, destroy things, or get something you don't have, but understanding the way it is. So then in this tradition, in all these Asian religions, philosophies, there's this, what they call the law of karma. And so this is, what does this mean? And, so it oftentimes takes on a kind of, it's my karma, and so my karma becomes very much me as a separate person, and if the karmic conditions of the present are not very desirable, embarrassing, or totally false or wrong, we can resign ourselves. It's my karma. It's a kind of resignation by using karma as an identity. So you hear people in Thailand talking about it's my karma. And so even in monastic life, monks, well, if they can't if they feel they can't meditate, they say it's my karma, I don't have enough barami or accumulated past virtues to meditate in this life. And so these are kind of distortions of what karma really is by attaching to it as some kind of personal identity. But karma is about samsara, about conditioned phenomena. And it's not personal. It doesn't mean for you to identify with, if whatever state of mind you're in at this present moment and say it's my karma. You can say that, you're free to believe that. But that's not really reflecting on it. Because ultimately, when you have your refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, or mindfulness, there's no karma there. That's not karma. Where the conditions that we identify with are all about karma. They're born and die, they begin and end. So like the four elements, earth, fire, water, and air, space, sensory consciousness is all karma, but is it a person? It is the way it is. And one way of justifying it, of just resigning oneself to fate in the present moment and say, it's my karma, I can't help it, is not developing the moment with wisdom and understanding, but just a kind of personal tendency when you want to understand that you can't help the way it is at this moment, and you resign yourself to it. So karma is about birth and death, and so we reflect on the karmic conditions. The body is a karmic condition. It was born, grows up, gets old, and dies. And so before the body dies, we can actually observe the arising and ceasing, the birth and death of conditions through witnessing what's going on in your mind or your own body. So Luang Por Cha used to like to say "die gon die," which is Thai for "die before you die." So this was always fascinating me. Die gon die before you die. And there's a sonnet, Shakespearean sonnet, whose ending is, "Death once dead, there's no more dying then." So death is the end of a condition. We apply the word death to usually the body, but like Ajahn Chah was emphasizing that we're dying all the time. As you begin to witness death, a condition that ceases, if you're patient and willing to endure what you're feeling in the present moment, you're aware of its change, and it doesn't not necessarily gets better, but it changes or disappears, dies. So I began to take a special interest, this is many years ago in Thailand, of just watching the ending of things in my mind, noticing the absence, or how emotions or memories that arise, and pay attention especially to their absence when they cease. It's like this. And this is where you begin to realize the deathless reality. So, die gon die before you die, is good advice. And this sense that I'm going to die is a creation of the ego, because you're identified, you're attached to everything that is born and dies. And so that's why the first teaching of the Buddha was about suffering and how to end suffering before the body dies. So in reflective meditation on bhavana, and this emphasis on Bhutto, or the witnessing of the way it is. Now, usually, in a country like this, people are well educated usually, and there's so much information. This is an age of incredible opportunity to find out all kinds of things, to acquire knowledge. Through the internet, through publishing books and videotapes and on like this. There's so much available now in just the past 50 years. It's amazing what is available about science, psychology, everything that, metaphysics, Scientology, totally absurd teachings to very profound philosophical discussions are available now just for anyone who's interested or accidentally finds themselves looking at some video on their iPad. So we acquire knowledge, like modern education is all about the acquisition of knowledge, getting degrees at universities, is trying to acquire much more knowledge. And of course, it goes on endlessly. The variety of knowledge, of things to know, to find out about the karmic conditions of samsara just seem to get more complicated as we, get more aware of the infinite variety of conditioned phenomena that arises and ceases. And so we can feel kind of hopeless in our acquisition of knowledge, and getting university degrees and on like that. But at the end of the day, all that knowledge arises and ceases. So you can't, it's not something stable or dependable. It's interesting, and maybe one can make a good living out of knowing a lot about a lot of things, or becoming an entertaining personality. But still, that's not contentment or happiness. And in this country, happiness is the main goal of life, to be happy. And so happiness is, I remember as a child, wanting a particular toy. I remember this vividly because I became obsessed when I saw in a shop window this toy that I really wanted. So I kept pestering my mother to get me this toy. And I remember telling her that if she got me this toy and gave it to me, I'd be completely content. I'd never ask for anything more again. So my mother got the toy and gave it to me, and I was happy for a while, but then I bored with the toy. And it surprised me because at that moment, I wasn't lying when I said I'd never ask for anything again, but that's what I believed at that moment. If the only thing that was keeping me from my happiness was that I didn't have what I wanted. And what is happiness? Is it when you get what you want, something, you get a new car or whatever, that you have moments of happiness in life, but it's very changeable. Worldly happiness is very unstable, easily destroyed. But when the Buddha talks about contentment, it's called, or nibbana, the highest happiness. It's oftentimes, nibbana is described as the highest happiness. And so this enigmatic word, nibbana, is the highest happiness. So we think, what is that? Getting everything we want and being content as a person, or being really the best bhikkhu in the world, or, as we think in terms of the worldly conditions, the way the mind thinks and idealizes everything. Nirvana is an ideal that makes us want to attain it. And then the whole reflective nature of Theravada Buddhist monasticism is about contentment with 4 requisites: shelter for the night, food in the alms bowl, robes, based on the lowest possible kind of standard of rag robes. We're not allowed to ask for anything, but we can find rags that lay people have thrown away and make a robe. So it's called a rag robe tradition. And then shelter for the night, root of a tree. That's very low standard. Shelter for the night, rag robes. Medicine is fermented cow's urine, which was obviously some kind of medical treatment in ancient India. But that's not very you can imagine trying to be content with fermented cow's urine, or so these requisites, are placed at the lowest possible standard. But the Buddha knew that the lay communities wouldn't, if one was keeping within the traditional forms of Vinaya as bhikkhus and meditating, that would inspire them. It was because it was a message, a way of reflecting on life and understanding Dhamma, realizing Nibbana for yourself. So the particular form, when I went to live in England, the wearing these kind of robes in London was, I considered it like bringing this particular tradition into consciousness of the people there. So even though there was, discontentment with the robes didn't work so well in a country like England as they do in a country like Thailand, was a very warm country. And England's known for its wet dampness. So, there were all kind of attempts to adjust, to adapt to the existing weather conditions of a different climate, different country. But the main form has always been respected as you see here in Abhayagiri. So then, trying to make myself content with 4 requisites, sometimes I could just out of, there are certain moods, feel content with them, because I wanted to be content as a person. I like the idea of contentment. But what is contentment as a reality, as a real experience? And so just, trying to be calm and grateful and accepting was admirable ways of trying to deal with the life. But still, there's a lot to be discontented about. Living in London, when you've been living in Thai forests for years, in a busy, world-famous city like that, and we lived on a fairly busy street outside the Vihara in Hampstead. And so the monks that were there had to deal with discontentment, the noise of traffic, there was a pub across the street from the Vihara, and in the summertime, they played rock music, which would drift into the Vihara when you're meditating, and you feel discontented with that. And the rock music I remember wasn't even very good rock music. So the critical mind, why it shouldn't be this way, we've got to get out of London, live in the forest, and on and on like that, discontenting, complaining about things. Rather than a shelter for the night, there was alms food in the bowl, we had robes and medicine. And UK has a really good medical system, national health. And so, immediately, I was only in London about 3 days when they insisted I sign up for the health care. And I was surprised because I thought, well, I'm an American. I've just arrived here. I'm an immigrant, and They want to make me sign up for something. I'm not even a proper resident or citizen. They said, it doesn't matter. That people come from all over the world to get medical treatment in England because it's free. And so I was quite impressed with that, knowing how the American health system works. Then when we lived in London for 2 years, and then we went to West Sussex to Tithers, and there was a lot to be discontented about. And so discontentment, then when you ordain monks and nuns, and then they want to leave, you feel discontented with that. Disappointed or discontented. And then on and on like that. There's so much in monastic life to be disappointed about or discontented. And so this is recommending to be the witness of discontent, rather than trying to will yourself into trying to fool yourself that you are contented when you're not. So bhavana is observing the way it is. And like right now, none of us can help the way we feel at this moment. You don't choose to feel emotionally what you're feeling at this moment. It just happens. Like our karma, the karma of individuals, it's different. So we tend to be very critical of those whose karma we don't particularly like. So, we think people should be a certain way, respectful and honorable and honest and grateful and kind, and an ideal person is all that. But all of us are karmic conditions that we cling to and identify with, and they're always in this changing process, they're unstable. So we find our stability. What is stable in every single one of us is awareness, because that's not a condition, that's not a karmic condition. And then we can say that's what one really is, all of us. You begin to get out of the separative position of being a separate person, because that idea of being an individual, separate physical body, a separate personality, is is very threatening. As a person, as a physical human being, as a male or female, there's a lot that, one's going to be criticized, misunderstood. Can we understand and appreciate everybody's karmic experience of this present moment? We might take an inventory to find out how everyone is how they see what they're feeling at this moment. We can say, well, some is I approve of, some I don't understand at all, some is wrong. Those are judgments that individuals, personalities, egos make about others. So what is the way out of suffering? The way out of discontentment is understanding. And this is what we call wisdom. It's universal wisdom. It's not personal knowledge of Buddhism. It's not having a PhD in Buddhist studies or Abhidhamma. It's the simple reality of witnessing, trusting in awareness. Before I started reflecting on Dhamma at this event, and I was asked to give a formal request for giving a talk, And I gave the Namo Tassa, then I gave this Pali sense, which I always found very inspiring. Aparuta desangamatasa tawara, and it's the gate to the deathless is open. And according to the suttas, when the Gautama, the Buddha, was enlightened, he made this pronouncement: the gate to the deathless is open. So what is that? You know, it's what is the gate to the deathless? And so this inquiry into the way it is, you see that what we identify with is all about death, ending, change. And that's why the first noble truth is suffering, because when we're attached to these unstable, inadequate conditions, we don't know what we're doing. We're caught in the momentum of habit and belief and fear and discontentment and unhappiness. So why do people drink so much or take drugs? You know, because they can't stand the present moment as it is, as they're experiencing the realities of here and now. They can't bear the conditions that they're feeling, the emotions they're feeling at this present moment. So one way to distract oneself from the suffering of the present moment is have a drink, smoke pot, take drugs, go to sleep, eat something, endless distractions, turn on the TV. Ways of dealing with boredom and disappointment and fear, guilt, remorse, because the present moment is, you know, we aren't happy as karmic conditions in the present moment, and we want to be happy. So one way of doing that is drinking. You can get a kind of momentary happiness, or take drugs and things like that give us a sense of high or a sense of happiness or bliss, which is very desirable, but it's impermanent, it dies. That kind of happiness has no stability and leads to addiction. We become drug addicts, alcoholics, through our need for distraction in these various ways of using substances. So meditation then is, in this bhavana, meditation is a generic term for almost any kind of mental training, but in terms of the Pali word bhavana, it's mindfulness, and this emphasis on witnessing the way it is, noticing that something arises and letting it be what it is, and it ceases. If you do this, if you really practice bhavana, trust it, then you will begin to realize the end of suffering. The present moment is the very end of suffering, rather than a miserable experience that you want to distract yourself from. William Blake, the English poet, said, "Contentment is heaven itself." So contentment is bliss. It's not personal. It's not like I'm content as a person. As a person, I still live with the habit patterns, my language, my memories of human form, this human form. So when I become concerned about my body and my emotional habits and my memories and thoughts, then I'm no longer content or happy. Because what is an old man, what do I have to look forward to? Death. At this age, you're going to die soon. So as a person, that is, that's, as a conditioned personality, death is a mystery. We don't quite know what will happen when the body dies. So my sister, who passed away a week ago, when I last saw her, she was very frail, and she was looking forward to dying to be with Jesus. So that was her way of dealing with the imminent prospect of death, was that when you're dead you go and live with Jesus, which is very comforting on a conditioned level. Or I've been a good monk for over 50 years, so will I be going to Nibbana when I die? That would be a comforting thought as a person. That's personal thinking. Those are concepts, words. And as a person, you can think, maybe I haven't been that good, will I have to be reborn? And so then you start doubting, the whole question of being a separate person creates endless doubts. Because you're not what you think you are or believe you are. You're not a body. You're not the emotions you have, your memories or thoughts. They are what they are. They can be pleasant, painful. But we can see all of the conditions, all conditions are impermanent. So that kind of reflection is developing wisdom. All conditions are impermanent. Because they are. So it's not like a Buddhist doctrine to believe in, but it's advice, wise advice on how to interpret the conditions we're experiencing as individual people. And so this reflective awareness is, a great gift that we can actually, the Buddha realized and tried to use words such as the Four Noble Truths, the dependent origination, the suttas and the Tripitaka and all that, are attempts to try to encourage us to not just read and believe the words that become Buddhists, but to really experiment, investigate. And that's always done in the present moment. Right now is all there ever is. There's no past or real future. The future is the unknown. Past is a memory. Now is the knowing. And so this emphasis on awareness here and now, as you abide in it, trust it, the reality of awareness is contentment. And you can call that happiness if you want, because it's not the worldly happiness of getting high on drugs or everything going well for you on the worldly level, but that kind of happiness is impermanent. So this talk this afternoon is just a way of encouraging you to learn to trust in awareness. Now, no one can make you do that, it's up to you. But these kind of reflections are attempts to encourage that kind of trust in these teachings of the Buddha, because it's not to believe them, because they're not beliefs. They're not metaphysical positions. They're not doctrines. They're teachings to awaken us to the way things are. So whatever you're feeling at this moment is just the way it is. And this kind of abiding in this, learning to just receive life as you experience it, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant. But it ends. All conditions that arise cease. And what's left when everything has ceased is peace and contentment. And then they call that nibbana. So it's not like, as a person, you can attain nibbana, even though you hear people talking like that. Nobody ever attains nibbana as a separate person. Your personality can't become an arahant or a Buddha or anything else. Personalities are formed conditions. They're impermanent and unsatisfactory and not personal. So when you're trying to become an arahant or trying to attain nibbana as a person, inevitably you're going to fail at it because it's impossible. But knowing that the personality that you're experiencing right now, the emotions you're experiencing right now are the way they are, that kind of awareness is not personal, it's conscious awareness that is universal. And that's where human equality is perfect. Because consciousness is not personal, it's what holds everything together, where all conditions arise and cease. And through this kind of reflection, also wisdom manifests in our conscious condition, conscious awareness, through realizing the unity of the universe. It's one whole, complete, perfect whole, and the conditions in consciousness are, their very nature, imperfect. So by exploring this yourself, you begin to know this for yourself. It's no longer just faith in what the Buddha said or what some teacher tells you, but it's you realize this for yourself. You know this because it is the reality of what one really is. So when the gate to the deathless is open, the second line is Ye soda wan taba munchan tu satang, and that translated, those that hear this, trust in it, trust in awareness, the deathless awareness, conscious awareness of the here and now. Trust it. Don't try to find it, because you can't. It's like looking for yourself. Where can you find yourself? Or trying to see your own eyes. It's impossible for any of us to look at our own eyes, because the eyes are meant for looking at objects. Consciousness you can't find as an object, because that's what you are. It's not an object that you can imagine it, you can believe in definitions of consciousness, But you know you're conscious. Consciousness is here and now, and it's non-personal, and it's the gate to the deathless. So I offer this as a reflection.